we've got this opportunity in front of us that we never had as businesses even 10 years ago, which is, being able to influence the market in ways that we never were able to, whether it be through social media, through our own voices. So one of the things leaders should be looking at, and every leader should be thinking about, is how they're building their own personal brand. And that's really important.
That's according to Andrea Sampson, CEO of Talk Boutique, and this week's guest on the DesignRush podcast. She's a trusted advisor to scientists, tech innovators, and executives from Google and Deloitte who lead, speak, and influence with impact. Her philosophy: leadership is communication. When your team, board, and customers really understand your vision, that's when real leadership happens. Want to learn how executive storytelling fuels alignment, improves metrics, and scales influence across an entire organization? Watch the episode on YouTube, listen on Apple Podcast or Spotify. This is the DesignRush podcast, and I'm your host, Kia Johnson. Got a story worth sharing? Email us at spotlight@designrush.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the best industry insights. Andrea, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here. Before we unpack the conversation, let's warm things up with a bit of rapid fire. So my first rapid fire question is, what's one daily habit you swear by to keep your mindset sharp as a leader?
I meditate every morning. I get up early and I spend my first half an hour having a coffee, because you do need that, but also spending a good amount of that half an hour to 40 minutes meditating.
If you weren't working in leadership communication, what career would you have pursued?
I would absolutely have gone into behavioral science and market research, and would have been doing probably a lot of the, behind the scenes of figuring out why people do the things they do.
Most overlooked communication skill leaders need to master to align teams and investors effectively.
Oh, well, that absolutely would be storytelling. It is 100% the thing that most people think is a nice to have and not a have to have. And yet at the end of the day, stories are what make us not only connect, but understand. They act as the bridge for others to be able to get to the point of what it is we want. So storytelling, number one.
Biggest mistake leaders make when presenting to key stakeholders?
They miss the fact that they need to have a very clear, defined, and understandable idea inside of it. They'll often speak a lot and back their way into it, but because they haven't figured that out before they started, the backing their way into it can often be the thing that alienates or in some ways turns investors away or stakeholders, because we get bored. We don't know where they're going. And if they don't know where they're going, it can be the reason why we disconnect. So make sure that your idea is clear, crisp, and you know it before you go into that room.
Your quick go-to strategy for helping a leader stand out on a major global stage like TEDx?
Well, I'm going to come back to story. It is about the story, but it's having what I call an idea-centric story. So having a story that has an idea inside of it so that the idea is remembered and the story is retold. And so when you do that, your idea gets told all over the world. And that's what TED Talks are really about.
Andrea, thank you so much for playing along there. Really enjoyed what you had to share. So now I want us to step into the deeper part of our conversation. Andrea, you have transformed countless founders, CEOs, and executives into globally recognized leaders and TEDx speakers, and you've guided them to secure influence across teams, investors, and clients. Now, reflecting on your journey, what would you say is the one leadership transformation story or client success that you feel truly defines your approach and impact?
Gosh, that's a big question. Because we've worked with so many, and the challenge with a question like that is that you remember the ones most recent, right? And so, but I will take you through one that I've been working with a leader who is a global head of he heads up a global organization, and they're going through a big transformation. And it's been a really interesting process with them, because we've helped them to retell who they are in the world. And in the retelling of who they are in the world, it's redefined their business. And that's been a really interesting process, because here's an organization that is headed by a visionary who I've been working with for many years. And that visionary, the work that we've done together has really helped him to step into being more of that visionary as opposed to a CEO. Right? Because he is the CEO, but he's stepped into a visionary role as we have defined his voice. So, this is a person who regularly is on international stages. And yet he was speaking more and more and more about the business that he was in and sort of the process of that business. And what we've done together is defined him as that visionary looking forward, out and onward. And that's helped him to expand his thinking. Now, what that did was then it had him looking at his own organization and saying, wait a minute, if this is who I am, then what about the organization who I head? How can they keep up with who I've become? So, through that process, there was, a decision. And I, remember about almost a year ago now, him saying, like, it's time for me to rename the company. And, he's a public company, he's got to go through a board of directors, all of that. And so I worked with him through all of that. And what was so fascinating was to see that process. So we came in, we have a program called Story Finding for organizations. And so when he knew that they were doing this, they brought us in to work with their entire team on finding the news story of who they were going to become. And, it was a process. I mean, these are individuals. It's a tech company. It has a lot of engineers inside of it who tend to be highly process driven. And of course, they were proud of a 60-year-old organization that had been built and was well respected in the market. And suddenly, the prospect of not only renaming them, but changing the way in which they show up in the world was huge. And so in working with them, it was uncovering where a lot of the resistance lived. And so that was helpful. As we were building a story, we were finding the places of resistance. We were finding where there was opportunity for them to go. And what we were able to do, so as they went into a renaming and a branding process, gave them a story to take with them. But that story wasn't just about who they were becoming. It was actually about how they got there. So it was equally as important to bring the history, because all of the resistance was the pride of growth and leadership that they had been all these years in the market. And so, when you rebrand or rename or change, you can't forget who you were, because that's what got you there. And so as we built the story, it was so important that we listen to all of those people who felt so connected to the past and recognize and honor the past and bring it with us into the future, and use that as the launching pad for the future. So it was a really phenomenal process to go through, and they're still in it. They're only now actually today, actually, probably right about now, they are unveiling who they're becoming to their membership. And so the CEO is literally taking the stage to do that. And so it's it's been a big process for them, but also for us to watch this, to see how story can literally transform not only an individual, but the organization and the people within the organization. And, I think it's a testament to all of us in terms of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? Because, the businesses we create, the businesses we work for, the people we are really the sum total of the stories that we've told about them. And so what story are you telling yourself? And I think that was what I got to take away from that process, and what I hope the rest of the organization did as well.
What specific strategies or communication shifts did that leader then implement to align all of the stakeholders towards sustainable growth? Would be something that I would be wondering about. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a process. I mean, we started off with doing stakeholder interviews. So starting and with that, the process of stakeholder interviews is really identifying who are the key stakeholders who are going to really be instrumental in implementation. And so that was everything from board of directors to internal team members to even customers. And so we interviewed initially, we did a stakeholder interview, quite a broad stakeholder interview process, so qualitative research. We did some more syndicated style research doing what we call a pest analysis, so a political, economic, societal and technological review of the world, like basically what's going on in the world. And we took our stakeholder analysis, we took our pest analysis, and we combined those to understand where the opportunity lives. Like, what is it that we're hearing? Where is there white space or a gap? What we then did was worked with the internal team to test that. And so we went back with, here's what we're hearing, here's what we're seeing, here's what we think is the opportunity. Now you tell us what you think. We worked with that internal team. We then took the output of that and went back to the board of directors, because the board of directors were really the key stakeholders in this process, who needed to, because the board of directors are made up of the companies who actually support this organization. And so there was a dual role played in that, where they were both board of directors, but they were also customers. And so we were able to test sort of the platform of the story with the board of directors. So what we got was, and then we went back to the internal team one last time after the board of directors approval. So it was this process of slowly getting buy-in, but also hearing. Because every time we did something, what was happening, and I was working very, very closely with the team who was sort of managing this process internally at this organization. We would implement changes. We would make small tweaks and changes so that we weren't just showing it to them. We were listening, and we were responding. So every time it came back, we were addressing the concerns that had been addressed in the previous part of that. So it was a very bespoke approach, but also it was respectful. And I think that was what was most important. The CEO is a highly respected and highly respectful individual. And it's reflected in the team that he's created, and even in the process that we took. It was always about respecting everybody along the way.
If you were to maybe look at past experiences that you've had with others that you've perhaps taken through this process, do you then see, in terms of like a sort of forward-thinking mode, that it always is something that brings you that revenue and brings you, what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a process. The story finding program that we ran with that organization is something that we do fairly regularly. And I can tell you that companies that we worked with, let's say 2 years ago, they'll come back to us and say, that was the single most important thing we did in that year, because what it did was it helped us to align our internal team so that we could achieve our goals. So it's, when you have a story, and I think this is the thing people forget, organizations, corporations, I always quote this, Yuval Harari, and I think it's in Sapiens, his book Sapiens. He starts it off by talking about that the corporation is really a legally a legal entity that is nothing more than a story, right? We take a story and we incorporate it, and we give it laws, right? We give it legal rights. And so the story is key, right? Like, because what's the story that we've built about our organization? And what happens over time with corporations, with large organizations, even with small organizations, it doesn't matter how large you are, your story has to be something that everybody understands, because it's what you're selling to your customers. You might have products and services, but ultimately it's the story around those products and services that makes people want to buy them or not buy them. And so if your team, your internal team, doesn't understand that story, your likelihood of selling is pretty low, right? Or if there's an inconsistent understanding of that story. So one person is saying it one way, another person is saying it another way. It's okay for everybody to have the way to say a story, but it has to be the same story. And often it isn't. And so that is the piece. There's an organization we worked with. It was a company that works in in employment. Their employment services. They work as an intermediary between employers, employees, employment services companies, and government. Okay, so there's sort of this hub, and it was a really hard thing to describe what it is they do. So what they actually do is they're like a workforce management system working to bring together employers, employees, and services so that all of it works together. And they administer government funds because governments give grants for employers to be able to hire. Well, one of the biggest challenges is in how do you administer those grants appropriately so that they make the impact that they are meant to make in country. And this company had developed a system that allowed for that. And it was, like I said, it was a workforce. It was what we called a digital community workforce system. That's what they were, because it was a digital system. Everything happened, using technology, but it was they had built these communities, and they were administering. So they were a system, but they couldn't. They were in their early days. It was an interesting company because it had been built out of a university. So a university professor who worked in future of work, that was his area of expertise, had identified this gap, created this thing because he saw it was needed, and it turned into a company that lived inside of a university. And so they couldn't quite figure out who they were. Were they part of the university? Were they separate? If they were separate, what is it that they do? And so we helped them to define that. So we, again, did the same process with that particular company. And in defining them, suddenly it was that, and I remember when we came up with digital community workforce system, that phrase, it changed how they saw themselves. For the very first time, they went, oh my God, we get it. Because even though those four words together, it might be a bit confusing to somebody outside of that world, but within it, each word had specific meaning. Each word gave them purpose. And suddenly their internal team all went, oh my God, I get who we are. And that created a propulsion forward that they had been growing because they were doing all of this administration of funds, but now they were growing in the right direction. They knew what they were doing. They were able to build longer term relationships. They were able to bring partners in with greater promise. And so it just changed the way that the internal team saw themselves and therefore how they acted with their external partners.
In your experience coaching leaders, what would you say are the biggest obstacles that executives face today when they are trying to align the internal teams, their investors, and their clients around this unified growth strategy?
It's understanding. That is, I think, the biggest thing is that, as a communications expert, and I've spent my career in communications. I was in marketing and advertising. I was a branding specialist. I've done a lot of work in communications, but it wasn't until I moved into the work that I do now as a communications coach where it really hit me. And I think, right now you and I are speaking the same language. We're speaking English, except that culturally we've got probably different backgrounds. We probably have grown up even in different countries, maybe. And so the words that I use and the words that you use, even though they sound exactly the same, the meaning, the context behind them is different. And so, but I assume you know what I'm saying, and you assume I know what you're saying, right? And for the most part, we're right. And so we live under this false precept that we actually are speaking the same language. But in reality, we're not. Because of the differences in culture, in context, in identity, all of these things play in. So as a leader, the thing that is most difficult is, first of all, admitting that you probably have a different context than everybody else on your team because you're the leader, okay? So your context is right away going to be different. You know more, you have a better understanding of what that story means. And so your challenge is to be able to bridge the context with every different group that needs to know it in the same way that you know it. And not just know it, but feel it, believe it, and want to action it. And so understanding that bridging is essential. So you can't go into, and I think this is where most leaders make the biggest mistake. They go in believing that they can tell people what it is they want them to do, or what the vision is, or what the overarching outcomes are, and have everyone understand it. And they just can't. You have to be thinking about every person in that audience because of what you're doing. If you're talking to an audience of thousands, it's different. But when we're leaders, we're talking to our teams, we're talking to our the teams that we manage, the teams that we are part of, and the teams that we have to report to, right? So that leaders kind of have 3 different accesses to teams. And so you've got to think about each one of those teams differently. You can't be saying the same thing over and over. It has to be contextualized to that team. And you have to look at the way in which you're languaging it, and ask yourself, like, is that metaphor well understood by everybody? And should I be using a metaphor here? Because am I willing to risk that somebody knows what that is, or might actually take it in a different way? So it is about understanding the language you're using, how that language can be received by that stakeholder group, and what is it that you can do to make that language or that communication even more effective. And this is where, again, because I'm a storyteller, I will come back and say the best way to do it is through story. Because with story, what we're doing, we're allowing people to live it along with us. So we're telling it through a story. The story is often personal. The story is often not related to the thing we want them to know, but related from a standpoint of the function of it. So is this about transformation? Is this about revolution? Is this about, whatever the function of the thing we're trying to do? Find a story that lives in that place. Now tell that story. Build out your idea inside of that story. And now what you've got is a cultural and contextual bridge that everybody understands.
If I'm an executive, right, like, why should this matter to me, getting this understanding across? And then how would it actually impact my bottom line?
Well, again, it comes back to, if people don't understand that overarching vision, what is it you want them to achieve? They're going to be inconsistent in the way they achieve it, right? Because sometimes they'll get it right, and then other times they will go off on their own on their own merit. And what you want is to have a consistent understanding. So that consistency is essential. And we talk about vision all the time, especially as leaders. Like, we need a vision, okay, but we write these visions and then we stick them in a book or put them on a website, and we never actually, we might go back once a year and go, are we still living to our vision and mission, and these things. But we have to really think about that vision as the story of who we are. And when we think about it in that way, it allows us to have a common language that we can use with our teams. And that common, again, this is where you're creating your own language, quite frankly, but it's a vernacular. It becomes a shortcut. Right. So if we all know what the vision is, and the vision has a certain set of language that we all now fully understand, and that's what you've spent the time really getting everybody to understand, that's the vision. And in order to achieve that vision, here are the things we're doing. There's a direct alignment to that. Okay, great. Now, when I'm working with my team every week, the language I'm using is reminiscent of that vision. It's bringing everybody back to that, because, when I learned strategy many, many, many years ago, the thing that I learned was that, objectives are the ends, strategies are the means, and tactics are the ways in which we get it done. And so if we start with tactics, the problem with tactics is that we all can come up with tactics, but if we don't know what we're aiming at, we're going to go all over the place, right? So So we have to start with the objectives, which the only way we can have objectives is if we know what our vision is, right? Because the objectives are to achieve the vision. So we have to have that vision, then we have to have those objectives. Now, strategically, what are the things that we're going to invest in? Okay, what are the means? And then, okay, now that we know that, now what are the tactics we're going to take within those strategic initiatives that will drive towards those objectives? So that you can see that that's a long ways away, right? So you're going from vision all the way down to tactic, but there's got to be connector points all the way through. And so if you're the team person at the bottom of that process, and your job is to achieve the tactics, if you don't understand that vision in a quick way, you're going to be actually steering the ship all over the place unknowingly. So the leader has got to be able to say to the tactician, wait a minute, this is, our objectives, our goals are this. How is your tactic achieving that? And if you're a tactician, you might not really understand that relationship between strategies and objectives, but the language should give you that understanding, if that makes sense.
You do find this in spaces as well, that sometimes leaders often default to transactional communication rather than like strategic influence building, because you're talking about, the strategy being so important, and talking about, going from vision to tactics, and then obviously having all those connecting points in between to just.
And transactional being telling people what to do, right? Do this, not that, right? Because I think they get frustrated, right? They get frustrated because the tacticians, the people who are actually carrying it out, they're not able to find the language that bridges it. And this is what I'm getting at, is like, without that language, that's what happens. We default to, well, it's easier for me to do it myself. Let me just tell you what to do. And of course, it's not helpful in the long run, because at the end of the day, what happens is that leader is feeling like they don't have a team that supports them, that, that the work is not valuable, and so a bunch of things happen with that, right? And it erodes trust, it erodes confidence, and the leader doesn't feel good either, right? So it's not just like at the person who's being told what to do, but the leader feels like they're ineffective. And so this is where building that bridge through communication is so key. And I think, strategy is one of those things that, I want to come back to that, because so many people feel like strategy is important, and it is. Like, don't get me wrong, strategy is incredibly important, but strategy is not something you do. Strategy is something that you use as a filter, right? Having a good strategy says what to say no to. That's what strategy is, right? So, and that's where, and I think as leaders, one of the biggest challenges is being able to effectively communicate the strategy so that that tactician knows what to say no to, right? Because especially when you're in the heat of execution, you're running a program, you're delivering something to your end user, and you get a lot of opportunities get presented to you. And how do you choose? What do you do? Which way do you go? Which supplier do you choose? And so if you don't have if you don't have an understanding of the strategy, what is the right strategy, then how do you know what to say yes to and what to say no to? Because strategy, all it is, like I said, it is the focusing of effort so that you get a straighter line to your end result.
I want to move our conversation a little bit to my next question and find out from you, what key metrics or leading indicators do you advise executives to focus on when they're measuring their influence strategies are truly aligning all stakeholders and driving sustainable growth?
Every organization is different. I mean, clearly you want to be looking at your key metrics of your organization. I mean, first of all, revenue generation, right? I mean, that's going to be key, of course, because that, without revenue, an organization is really not going to continue. So rev gen is going to be, top line revenue is going to be important. But I think, and then costs, what's your margin? Like those, to me, like if you're looking at revenue generation and margin, like those are two really, really key pieces. But there are some others. Like today we've got we've got this opportunity in front of us that are, we never had as businesses even 10 years ago, which is, being able to influence the market in ways that we never were able to, whether it be through social media, through our own voices. So one of the things leaders should be looking at, and every leader should be thinking about, is how they're building their own personal brand. And that's really important, right? So companies have brands, and we've always invested in the brands of companies. Why? Because what that does is it builds long-term value for the business. And there is actual, there's been lots of studies done to show that there's actual, revenue value to a brand. But as individuals, we never really thought about ourselves in that way. How do I contribute to that overall brand, or how valuable is my brand as a leader? Well, what we're learning now in the world we live in is that leaders who have strong brands in the market attract more business. So one of the things I would suggest that any person inside of an organization, or as an entrepreneur who's building their brand, is they need to recognize that there is the business brand, and then there is their own personal brand. And how are you measuring your personal brand? Do you have a presence on social media, and have you chosen which platforms you're on? Because you don't have to be on all, but choose your platforms. And if you're in a business-to-business environment, I would suggest you look at business-style platforms, the ones where business gets done, like LinkedIn, like YouTube. These tend to be the places where businesses look for other businesses. And so, have you built your platform in those places? How have you built your own voice? Have you built a community of people who you influence on a regular basis as a leader? Not just your team, outside of your team. So if you think of LinkedIn as an example, you'll have a following on LinkedIn. What are you doing with that following? How are you influencing them? Because that could be your next, best hire could come from that community. Your next customer could come from that community. So you've got to think about yourself as a brand. So understanding what are the measures of success of the business, revenue, margin, and there are others, of course, that are pretty standard. But I think the one that so many of us miss is our own personal brand, and making sure that we are actually thinking about ourselves as a brand. We are creating consistency for who we are, and we are creating our own brand within the communities that we want to have influence over.
What about intangible things that we need to measure, like trust and loyalty and alignment? Because you're talking, about personal brands. So how would I then measure that, in terms of metrics? What would I do?
When you get into, the intangible measures are difficult to truly measure, right? But you can, I think, one of the things that you would be looking at from, as a leader, I think soft skills are probably the most important skills of this generation now. And those soft skills include things like trust and vulnerability, right? Like being able to show up with those types of skill sets. And so how do we build and engender trust? Well, the way we do that is by showing up vulnerably. And so what does that look like? So again, if you are building a brand, those would be some of your core values that you're building your brand based on. You might be speaking about those things in those communities. You might be actually doing videos on how to build trust as a leader, but you've got to be doing it. You can't just be talking about it. So the way to measure it would be through looking at your team and what is the effectiveness of your team? Are they able to effectively do their job, but at the same time effectively ask for help, right? Because I think it's really key, right? Like, because I think when we look at business today, and look, I have been in business for, close to 40 years when I look at my whole career. And when I think about 40 years ago, when I stepped for the very first time into the corporate world, I mean, it was a very different place. We had dress codes that told women that we couldn't wear pants. Like, let me just, that was 40 years ago, right? And today we wouldn't even consider that, right? Like, that was like, that's not even, in our realm of possibility. But when we think about especially the newer generation coming into the workforce, many of them are coming in very tender and really coming out of a time that has been very challenging, and they're quite scared. And so how are we building a culture and an environment of performance? Because that's important for organizations, right? It's not about trying to, kind of be nice to everybody. It's about performance. We need you to perform, but we also need you to be well, right? And so as leaders, therein lies the challenge. I need you to show up every day and do your job to the best of your ability. And I want you to know that if you in some way are not able to do that, that you feel trust in me as a leader to be able to say so I can help you get what you need so you can perform on another day. And that's the piece that I think is the biggest challenge for leaders today, because that kind of empathy has never been taught, has never been resident in the corporate world. And yet the generation coming in, Gen Z, it is what they need. And we're learning real time as we do this.
What I want to find out from you, Andrea, is from your perspective, what should brands specifically look for when selecting an agency or leadership partner to help them align teams, investors, and clients? I'm sure you've come across this in terms of your background itself and your experience. I'm keen to hear about the clear green flags and what would you say are the red flags that one should watch out for?
Yeah, so I think right away, whenever you're choosing a partner to work with, no matter who that partner is and what level of your business, I think the very first thing you've got to go to is your values. Values alignment are key. And this is another thing we downplay, right? We put them on a paper, these are our corporate values, and then they sort of go off into the ethers, and we never think about them again. But yet values alignment are the key. Like when you are choosing a partner, you need to look at it and go, like one of our core values is curiosity as a company. And, so whenever I work with an organization that is, it really values outcomes over discovery, it doesn't work. Because my core value is curiosity. That doesn't mean that I don't want outcomes. But it does mean that discovery is equally as important for me. And so I need to find partners who want to learn and grow along with me through that curiosity factor, right? I deeply know another one of my values is collaboration. And so I'm looking for partners who can collaborate. And like we just had a situation where we worked with a partner that we didn't align with. And when I went back, it's what I realized was that I had missed that. This was a partner who felt that they didn't need to collaborate with us, that they had enough information, they could go off and do the work and bring it back to us. But the problem with that, of course, is that we're growing and changing and all things are happening. And so I'm trying to collaborate, and this organization is trying to get information and go and do it. And so we had an absolute mismatch. And so whenever you're looking for any sort of a relationship, first go to your values. What are your values? What do they mean to you as an organization? Use them as a decision-making tool. When you're looking at your partners, go back to those values and go, does it fit? Do we have enough they don't have to be exactly the same, but do we have enough similarities that we can work together? So that would be number one. Then red flags, like when we start looking at the red flags of working together, communications is going to be number one. Like this is key, right? So how do they communicate? Is there a breakdown of that communication? Are you able to understand them? And again, I find this, like, it fascinates me the longer I'm in business, that so much of our world is about miscommunication. So many of the problems we have, I come back to, we think we're speaking the same language. We are not. We are not, you know, so we have to constantly check in. And so, you know, I do this a lot in, again, learned behavior of, let me tell you what I've just heard you say, right? So I will check in with you. You know, here's what I think I just heard you say. Am I right? And so, and it's so interesting because when you do that, what happens is, I would say probably 75% of the time, the person will go, no, actually, that's not quite right. And sometimes I'm using the exact words they just said to me, right? And so having that check-in, making sure that you are actually understanding what the expectation is, because that is key. Up front, do you know what you want from this partner, or do you know what they want from you? Expectations. The expectation is when you right out of the gates, and at any point along the process where you have an expectation misalignment, that's a red flag to go, let's go back and do a check-in on the partnership. What is it that's happening here? Because what caused this misalignment? Was it simply we didn't understand each other, we both came away with something, we were moving too fast? Or is it that we missed it on the front end and we actually don't align?
Very,
right?
very true. It is.
So it again, that's why these red flags are important, because when we ignore them, we can get deeper and deeper. Go, oh, we can fix it. That was just a small misunderstanding. No, when you have a small misunderstanding, that's a moment to take a step back. What that is and it should be for all of us, and of course none of us do this, but we should, is to put the brakes on and go, let's just have a quick meeting, you and me. Like, and you may be the CEO of that company. I'm the CEO of this company. We had a breakdown in communications. Let's dissect it so that we understand whether or not we're still in alignment with each other. Because regardless of how small or how big that was, and I'm not talking about little things, like it's something where it's big enough where it's made it to the C-suite, where you go, look, it's okay if we no longer align. We have to start off with that. Like, there's no blame, there's no finger pointing. This is not about who did what. This is about making sure we still are in alignment with each other. And if we're not, then let's find a way to make sure that we're both whole coming out of this. And when you have that kind of a partnership at a leadership level, what it does is it allows both organizations to come fully, to come with vulnerability, right? This is where trust, and so it has to be at the C-suite level. That has to be demonstrated. And so that then it comes down.
Definitely. I think one of the key things is that, from what I'm taking from our conversation, is having that feeling of partnership, you know? If you feel like this is your partner, I mean, that's the key word here, then automatically everything will just fall into place. And the other question I wanted to quickly and this is a little sidestep to my main questions, but do you think that the reason this is happening, that the pauses are not taken, is because there is this very rushed mentality happening right now within the industries? Because it's the situation of must, now, you know?
Yes.
I mean, because of that, we're not doing it.
I've had, I have my own podcast, or I'm about to have my own podcast, and I've been interviewing guests. And the last two guests that I've had conversations with, this has been the topic of our conversation. Because, the reality is we live in a world that is all about movement forward. We have to keep going. And, I think we would all agree, it feels like time has sped up. And yet, slowing down is the only way for us to actually go forward. Because when we speed up, we make bad decisions. I mean, we know this, right? Like, if you're moving too fast, you end up, banging yourself into a wall. Like we know this, right? You're in a rush. You're trying to get out of the house. You've got your briefcase in one hand. You've got a piece of toast in your mouth, and you're walking out the door. And what do? You stub your toe, or you fall down the stairs, right? And so, it's the same in business, right? We try and move so fast. We try and stuff it all in. And one of the things I learned many, many years ago in advertising, because in advertising, we do a lot of project management, and there's something called the project management triangle. And what it says is, in any triangle, you define two angles, the third angle gets defined for you. So in project management, the project management triangle is time, cost, and quality, right? You can only have two. The other one is going to be defined for you, right? So you can have it fast and you can have it cheap, but it's not going to be good, right? Or you can have it high quality and you can have it cheap, but it's not going to be fast. So, right? So we have to learn this again, that speed does not mean that we're going to get it done faster. In fact, what often happens is that we have to do it again and again. And the other thing that I just actually, in speaking with this other individual who's a neuroscientist, and he brought up this thing that just sort of blew my mind, which was this idea of reasoning, and that with speed. So, we live in a world today, especially with technology and the advent of AI, is that it used to be that we would have an idea, right? And then we would have to do all the research and all the things. And then at some point we would implement that idea. And so there was a time lag, right? But with technology, we have an idea and we get it to implementation almost immediately, right? And the problem with that is that when we had the time lag, we had reasoning that would happen in between. So we would have the idea, right? And so this lack of this speed to market is actually creating a lack of reasoning. Why are we doing this thing? What is the impact of it? Because we can we can have an idea, go into technology and literally be in market in 24 hours. But should we? And that's the question. And so I think we are moving far too fast. I think that we are getting less done in short time, right? We feel like we're busy, we feel like we're doing more, but in fact, we're doing less and we're working harder.
What would you say is the most significant trend that you are seeing right now in leadership communication or executive influence? And how would you say forward-thinking leaders are leveraging it to align stakeholders and drive growth?
The trend, of course, right now is artificial intelligence. There's no question.
Yes.
And look, that's going to get even stronger. I think artificial intelligence is both a blessing and a curse. And the reason for that is that, when we look at generative AI, and we're going to be moving into different types of AI very quickly. So this is, again, it's not going away, but used well, generative AI is a thought partner. And when you think of it as a thought partner, it changes the way you use it. It's a tool. It's a tool for us. It's a way for us. Like, I use generative AI all the time, but I use it as a thinking partner. When I'm working, when I'm doing analysis, when I'm, even when I'm working with my clients, we will have a great session, and then I'll take the transcript of what we just did and have generative AI then give me a summary so that I can see it differently, because it's our words, but I need to see it differently so I can then give feedback to the client in a different way. So generative AI and any type of artificial intelligence is there for us to use as a tool. When we think of it as a replacement, we then start to change our relationship with it. And it's not a replacement. It will be a replacement for tasks, but not for humans. And that's really key. And so I think that's probably the biggest trend that's happening right now. I do think that the other thing we're going to see change quite dramatically is the role of the corporation moving forward. Because I think that, the way we work is different. And so the relationship between employees and employers is going to change. And, we all lived through 10 years ago, the advent of the gig economy, and it was sort of this big thing. And then it went away because people wanted jobs and the whole thing. But the reality is that concept of the gig economy will come back, but it'll be different. Because now what you're seeing is more, I think it's more communities of work. And so I think community will be the thing that is going to replace what today we call the corporation. We'll work within communities. So I think when we think about AI and the way in which we choose to work, we as humans will want to be better connected to the people and the tools that we work for and with. And so the choices will be made through those lenses. Where can I add the most value? How can I show up in the most highest version of who I am? Where can I be most creative? Those are some of the trends that I think we're going to see coming in, and the ways in which we're going to change the way we work together.
What would you say then is one leadership conversation that you believe industry leaders need to have more often to sharpen their influence and stay ahead of disruption?
So, empathy. I think it's something that has been sorely lacking from employers. And it's, of course, there's been empathy in different places, but I think as an overall overarching trait that needs to be incorporated into business today. And empathy is more than just for the individual. I think it's empathy for our consumers, for our customers. Looking at our customers not as means to build success, but empathy for what they're going through and the challenges that they're facing. Today our world is in a place of challenge. Like, we're in change. We are in massive change. It change that I don't think as humans we've seen for millennia. And so every part of us, our bodies, our minds, our souls, we're being challenged on every level. And so employers have to obviously have empathy for their employees, but they've got to be looking out to those customers who they're serving and saying, how am I best serving you? And am I best serving you? Rather than, how are you giving me your money and more of it? And I think that's a really different come from place. And maybe that's the idealist in me talking, because I certainly am an idealist. But yet I want to believe that is something, that is the place we're going to.
Oh, definitely. Andrea, you've got quite an amazing and extensive background, and you've guided top executives. I'd love to know from you, who have been the key mentors or influences that have shaped your leadership approach and your communication philosophy?
Oh gosh, it's such a hard question for me, because I think as a woman in business, when like I said, I started my career in 1989, and in that time, there weren't women leaders, right? There wasn't a lot. And I didn't grow up with mentors in the truest sense, but I had people I looked up to. They didn't look like me, but I looked up to them. And, I would say that those who have shaped me the most, I still remember reading the book that I would say is probably the book that opened me to looking at business different, and it's a very old book, of course, was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And that book changed me, because it allowed me to see the world through this lens of, again, it was a lens of empathy, because those 7 habits are very much about understanding how others are showing up in the world. So I would say that was, Covey was probably one of my biggest mentors. And I remember reading everything he wrote, and then getting into like behavioral economics and understanding, some of the pieces of behavioral economics that are really powerful. So, Malcolm Gladwell, like I still, every time, Gladwell comes out with a book, I read it. Why? Because I love his insights into the mundane, right? Like that's what he does. He's able to look at the everyday world and pull an insight out that I had never seen. And I think another one would be Simon Sinek. what I love about, and again, each one, you can see that there's a thread there. These are disruptive thinkers that feel like they're not disruptive, but yet when you listen to them, what they're saying is so obvious and yet missed. And that's what for me, if I could hope to emulate any of them, that's what I would hope to be able to present to the world, is that when we look at our world through just a little bit of a different lens, the whole world changes. And so don't be afraid to take out a new lens and look at your world. What are you missing because you're seeing it through the eyes you've always looked through?
What I would like to get from you right now, and you did give me a little bit of a snippet, but perhaps any advice for any leaders out there who are feeling maybe a little bit disjointed at this point in time, not understanding exactly where they are at with their teams, and maybe wanting to do it differently. Do you maybe have any advice that you'd like to share in ending?
Yeah, as a leader, your biggest job is to be a professional communicator. And so if you're having a challenge connecting with your team, if you're having a challenge maybe achieving your goals, the first thing I would suggest is go inward. So spend some time with yourself, do some meditation, but then also start looking at the way in which you are communicating. What is it that you're saying that's not being understood? We don't have, there's a book out there that somebody recently said to me, you should read this book, and it's called Surrounded by Idiots. And I remember at the time thinking, I don't want to read a book called that, right? Because I don't want to believe that I am. I want to believe that everybody around me comes to me and with me with the best intentions. And that's what our teams are. Our teams come to us because they believe in us, in the companies that we work for, in the products that we sell. They want to do a good job. So how can you help them do that? That's your job as a leader. So what is it you're doing that is helping them? And what is it you're doing that is maybe hindering them? And then spend time with them asking them the same questions. Be vulnerable. Show up with transparency. Build trust with them. Let them show up with vulnerability. And by doing that, you're going to understand how your team can grow so that you achieve what it is you need to achieve. Now, I'm not suggesting you take a year to do that. Do it quickly. But do it. And also get to know yourself. Don't be afraid of who you are, because who you are as a leader is your biggest asset and valuable tool that you have. And so as a leader, your job is to fully know who you are and communicate that fully.
Right. Andrea, it's been such a pleasure having you with us on the show today. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Kia. This has been absolutely a pleasure and a joy. Thank you for bringing me onto your show. I have enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you. Curious about what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune into our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.